Extinct advanced civilizations are a very popular topic for all people in the world. People ask themselves questions. Why did they disappear? Where did they disappear to? And where would we be today in terms of development if they had remained? Of course, the disappearance of such civilizations has always pushed humanity back hundreds of years. Some extinct civilizations have left us clear traces in the form of buildings, writings, and artifacts, but we only know about others through myths and legends. Humanity learned about Atlantis through texts written by the famous Greek philosopher, mathematician, and educator Plato. Atlantis is a legendary continent on which a highly developed civilization was supposed to reside, which was destroyed by a massive natural disaster around 9600 BC. According to scientific knowledge, at that time the end of the last ice age was already approaching. However, continental glaciers still bound a huge amount of water in the form of ice, and the level of the world ocean in 9600 BC was 40 meters lower than it is today. For comparison, at the top of the Ice Age period approximately 20,000 years BC, the sea level was 135 meters lower than it is today. To illustrate the situation in 9600 BC, it was possible to cross from the territory of present-day England to the territory of present-day France and Germany on dry land. There was a land bridge between India and Sri Lanka above the water level. It was possible to cross from the northwestern tip of Australia to New Guinea on dry land. There was also a dry connection between Australia and Tasmania. In the Bering Strait area, there was a Bering Bridge connecting Eurasia with North America during the Ice Age. However, the existence of Atlantis as a continent has never been convincingly confirmed, and there are still debates about its existence and possible location. However, the only source of information is the aforementioned writings of Plato, in which he describes the Atlantean culture, state system, and location. It was supposed to lie somewhere behind the Pillars of Heracles, and these are usually identified with today's Strait of Gibraltar. Most historians claim that Atlantis is only Plato's fiction. The reason, according to them, is that in the period of 10,000 years BC, the existence of such advanced civilizations is practically excluded. There are also no other written sources than Plato's. Unfortunately, Plato can no longer comment on this today, but I will do it for him. However, I personally take the liberty of disagreeing here, and the evidence from my side is, for example, Göbekli Tepe. Moreover, I find it ridiculous that the same historians elsewhere recognize Plato as a truthful historian and teacher, and when it does not suit them, they call him a storyteller. Moreover, if the great Alexandrian library had not burned down, we could have more writings by more writers describing Atlantis today. Today, Plato's written dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written in 360 BC, are the only source of information about Atlantis. In these dialogues, Plato refers to the story of the Greek statesman Solon, who learned about Atlantis from a priest there during his trip to Egypt. Solon was a famous ancient Greek poet and legislator in Athens. He is considered one of the 7 greatest sages of Greece. Plato devotes approximately 15 pages of text out of approximately 2,000 pages of his work to Atlantis. According to Plato, Atlantis sank 9,000 years before the time of Solon, that is 9,600 years BC. The continent was supposed to be the size of today's Asia Minor and Libya combined. According to Greek mythology, this area is ruled by Poseidon, the god of the seas. The name Atlantis is derived from the name of his eldest son, Atlanta. Beware of confusion with the Titan Atlant, after whom the Atlantic Ocean was named. Atlantis in Greek Atlantis was a large island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, almost a continent, apparently beyond Gibraltar. It is described as the narrow mouth of the Great Bay, which we call the Mediterranean Sea. Behind Atlantis, it is said, there were some smaller islands and then only the opposite mainland, which completely surrounds the ocean. This description of Plato is very interesting because how could Plato know about America? I wonder why opponents of his account of Atlantis do not comment on this. Plato also notes cyclical changes and progressive erosion in his texts, as if he were also counting on possible changes in sea level. We encounter a surprising knowledge of the workings of nature, complemented by brilliant intuition in combination with an ancient civilization. He further describes that Atlantis is in front of the mainland in the west, similar to how Crete is seen from Athens, in front of the Libyan and Egyptian mainland. Plato himself mentioned the analogy between the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean as a real sea, and that Crete is, after Poseidon, an island like Atlantis. And within the Aegean Sea, in front of Crete, lies the island of Thera, or Santorini, famous for its volcanic past and today also for the excavations of the Minoan culture of the Bronze Age. After a series of gigantic eruptions, the last one probably in 1628 BC, what remained of the island was a broken ring hundreds of meters high around the caldera, with a diameter of 9 kilometers flooded by the sea. Scientists estimate that the explosion of this volcano was 100 times stronger than the explosion of Vesuvius. For example, this is how one of the ancient Greeks describes the history after the catastrophic destruction of Atlantis. When Atlantis sank into the sea, only the best of the Atlanteans survived. After sailing around southern Crete, they landed on the Paximadia Islands, a little south of Malta. The best of them continued their voyage to Malta, some then went only to Phaistos, and a few more went through Zalmintos, reaching Oenogia, which is only 22 kilometers away. The best of the Greeks lived there, that is, the original Cretans, that is, the best of the Atlanteans. But let's go back. Solon states in Plato's texts that the royal power of Atlantis extended far to the west, including present-day Italy and Libya. When Atlantis launched its invasion, Athens took the lead in the Greek defense. After the Allies defected, they selflessly liberated the entire area up to present-day Gibraltar. Later, however, an earthquake combined with a great flood caused the entire Greek army to sink into the ground, and Atlantis also sank into the sea and disappeared. If the term Pillars of Heracles refers to the Strait of Gibraltar, this means that Atlantis lay in the Atlantic Ocean approximately at the level of Gibraltar. This hypothesis is supported, for example, by one of the first known Atlantologists, Ignatius Eldonelli, in his book Atlantis, The Pre-Flood World, from 1882. Here he claims that Atlantis lay approximately in the area of today's Azores. This archipelago is, according to Donnelly, the last remnant of the sunken continent. However, some hypotheses interpret the term Pillars of Heracles differently and place Atlantis outside the Atlantic Ocean. Some scholars believe that Solon made a mistake in his translations of Egyptian manuscripts and confused the number 100 with 1000. Atlantis would then have disappeared around 1500 BC and would have been 10 times smaller in size. Based on these ideas, researchers James Maver and James Bakey came up with the theory that the disappearance of Atlantis corresponds to the disappearance of the advanced Minoan civilization on Crete. A number of reliefs and wall paintings depicting bulls were also found at the site, and this cult was also practiced in Atlantis. Since Crete is not located in the ocean with the Strait of Gibraltar, but in the Mediterranean Sea, it is not directly Atlantis, but it is possible that some of the Atlanteans who survived the catastrophe found refuge here. I would also like to mention that the Egyptians also worshipped a sacred bull as early as 3000 BC. And how did Plato describe Atlantis? Atlantis was supposed to be a very fertile and densely populated country. The capital city measured 300 kilometers in circumference. 3 concentric circular water channels were built around the central Temple Hill, connected to the sea, which served as a port. The spiritual center of Atlantis was the Temple of Poseidon in the middle of the city. The building material was natural stone, which was found here in white, black, and red. There were 2 springs in Atlantis, one with hot and the other with cold water. Thanks to this, it was possible to establish numerous baths for all classes of the population. And trade with other advanced civilizations also flourished. The houses of wealthy citizens were heavily decorated with precious metals, mainly gold, silver, ivory, and obsidian, natural glass. There were vast fields around for farmers to grow crops and raise animals to feed the city. Plato also mentions a war that broke out between the lands before and after the Pillars of Heracles. As I mentioned earlier, Atlantis fought against Athens and Egypt and other states in the Mediterranean. Before the start of this war, the Atlanteans had conquered a large part of the Mediterranean as far as Egypt. The much smaller but more numerous Athens managed to defeat the Atlanteans and liberate the lands to the Pillars of Heracles and defend themselves against this powerful civilization. Egypt also managed to defend itself against the Atlanteans, and numerous hieroglyphs mention a war with the Sea People. Later, after these events, after a massive earthquake, the entire Atlantean continent sank into the ocean. Possible locations of Atlantis. A group of French scientists believe that Atlantis could have been located on the flooded island of Spartel in the Gulf of Kardzika. According to their analysis of the seabed, it turned out that the island of Spartel sank as a result of many earthquakes and tsunamis. In his article, Italian journalist Sergio Frau claims that in the time before Alexander the Great, the Pillars of Hercules marked the Strait of Sicily. Atlantis could therefore be identical to Sardinia, which was hit by a natural disaster. One part of the refugee population from Atlantis subsequently founded the Etruscan civilization on the Apennine Peninsula, and the rest of the surviving population joined the other sea peoples in attacking Egypt. This is where there is a striking similarity with the described war for the Mediterranean and the Egyptians themselves. One of the hot candidates is the island of Santorini, then Thera, belonging to the southernmost of the Cycladic Islands. The eruption of an underwater volcano, which according to the latest research took place 3,600 years ago, caused part of the island to literally sink into the sea. This date, by the way, would coincide with Svolin's data if he were mistaken in the thousands and returned to the hundreds. Tsunami deposits were found as far as the western coast of Asia Minor. Excavations have revealed settlements as early as the late Neolithic. At the time of the explosion, a prosperous city stood here, which, like Pompeii, was preserved under a blanket of lava. Interestingly, no human remains or objects made of precious metals were found, which indicates a successful evacuation of the population. Archaeologists consider the eruption of Thera to be the cause of the sudden demise of the Minoan civilization. Another possible location of the legendary city may be in the area of the so-called Bermuda Triangle near Cuba. Here in 2012, husband and wife Paul Wainswake and Pauline Zalicki and their team discovered huge ruins of a dead city at the bottom of the sea. They found that there were several sphinxes, pyramids, paved streets, and the remains of houses on the bottom, along with various inscriptions engraved on the walls. However, the scientific community doubts their findings and does not believe the camera footage very much. However, the couple are convinced that they have discovered an ancient city. Another location that deserves attention is the Reichak structure in Mauritania, which, unlike other locations, corresponds to the size of the city described by Plato. Another possible location is the previously mentioned Azores Islands, which was pointed out in his book by American Congressman Ignatius L. Donnelly. He himself considers the Azores to be the peaks of the sunken Atlantis. Interestingly, a seamount near the island was recently named Atlantis Seamount, and another was Plato Seamount. And one more recent discovery. Recently, a joint Japanese-Brazilian project called the Submarine Exploration of the Seabed discovered evidence of the possible existence of a previously unknown continent about 1,500 kilometers from Rio de Janeiro. Of course, Atlantis, the mythical civilization that was swallowed by the ocean, comes to mind. Of course, the Japanese and Brazilian geologists and oceanographers were not looking for Atlantis. However, they did find granite on the seabed, which is usually found only on land and not in sediments on the ocean floor. The granite could be a trace of an ancient continent that disappeared into the waters, similar to Atlantis, first mentioned by Plato 2,400 years ago. South America and Africa were once large, continuous continents. The area may have remained as a continent after the separation of tectonic plates, Professor Shinichi Kawakami told the Japan Times. This location, east of Rio, would also fit Plato's definition of the Strait of Gibraltar beyond the Pillars of Hercules. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please share it with your friends. Write me in the comments below what you think about Atlantis. Is it true or a myth? Write me which place you think is the most likely place where Atlantis rests.